Today we're going back in time to the days of President Taft, Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier. In Britain, you've got your choice between two kings, either Edward VII or George V. Choose wisely. The year is 1910. Model T Ford was still a new thing. Neon lights were being invented, as was the refrigerator. In Chicago, the city of big shoulders, though Carl Sandburg wouldn't call it that until 5 years later, our friends at Lyon and Healy were busy chugging along, being amongst the largest manufacturers of guitars in the world. They were building under several brand names, including Washburn and others, and making orchestral instruments as well. Having such a large market share, they were producing guitars both plain and fancy. Something for everyone. This one is kind of middle of the road. It's a parlor guitar. It's got pretty attractive decoration. The materials are on the modest side, though. The owner believes it was an American conservatory model. Typical ladder brace instrument. It's about 13.5 inches wide. This one has a tailpiece and a floating bridge. Not all of them did. It's also got that crazy white oak finish. I believe they called this the 16th century finish for some reason in their catalog in the 1890s. This is a faux finish. It's painted on, basically. At this time, decorative arts in the U.S. were sort of dominated by the craftsman movement, or arts and crafts in the U.K. You got furniture makers like Gustav Stickley using quarter-sawn white oak as pretty much the primary decorative component on his otherwise fairly austere-looking furniture. It became very influential. So, so much a part of the vernacular that they started faking it. There were several methods to do that, most of which kind of resembled a big rolling printing press. Sometimes the grain patterns were actually embossed into the top and then sort of filled in. Other times they did it with handheld rollers or with stamps. So with some dark wiping stain on top, you end up with this characteristic flecked appearance and the prominent medullary rays. Oak, real oak, makes a pretty good guitar, by the way. I'm not sure what wood is under this pattern here. The neck seems to be poplar. Top is an eastern spruce, either white or red spruce. Tailpiece guitars. Love them or hate them. It's original to the guitar, in this case. There were a lot of these added later on as an afterthought to other instruments as a way to deal with rising action, because people would cut down the height of a standard glued-on bridge so low that there would be no break angle left. So they put one of these on. But there were also factory equipment on some models, like this. The bridge may have seen better days. It's got a piece of fret wire for the saddle. That's not uncommon. It's also got grooves that act as string guides to regulate the spacing, and some of them are in use and some aren't, so I don't know. They seem to have moved around a bit. We might end up making a new one of these, and the owner wonders if I could make one with a bone saddle instead, so there'd be future adjustability. I think that might be possible. As far as work to be done, well, there's this slightly nasty separation between the back and the sides, here in the region of the tail block. In the action, well, she's a little bit tough. Excellent for slide. Yeah, it's more than 1/4 of an inch. Somewhere around 7 millimeters. That's extreme. So definitely, needs a neck reset. With a ruler on the top of the frets, we're basically at the bottom of the bridge. Isn't good. Means there's going to be a whole lot of material removed from the heel, although we might be able to help things a little bit when we're re-gluing the back. That could push things back into alignment slightly. The ironic thing now is, of course, with the strings positioned as they are, the string doesn't actually contact that fret wire saddle, sitting up way above it. And this bridge seems to have been glued in place. Not in the correct alignment. It's strung lefty, of course. This is another lefty conversion. But there's actually much more room on this side of the fingerboard. The strings are running farther towards the center than on this side. So This bridge ideally has to come this way some more, which would put the strings even farther from their proper locations. Well, maybe not. We'll see. Yeah, the funny thing is someone has filled these grooves, rendering it useless. Yep. I'm going to make a new bone nut. These are some of the tiniest little screws to hold on a tailpiece. Like tuner screws. That hasn't been off for a very long time. So this bridge was glued on in just about the right place. Of course, as it was working previously, the string length would have been about 3 millimeters too long, as it was using this as the bearing surface. It's a very strange design, with the front edge being so much lower than the back. Feels like there's some nails in there. Yeah, a couple of brads. I'll do some measurements here. This bridge is about 13 millimeters, just over half an inch tall at its tallest point in the back. Along the front edge here, it's more like 10 millimeters, which is about 3/8. And if I want to use a piece of bone for a saddle, we'll be really conservative and use like a 2 millimeter saddle. In order to do that, I'm going to want to add some width to absorb the forward pressure on the saddle. Probably about 3 millimeters-ish. So this is around 11 millimeters wide. Well, yeah, about the same on both sides. So the new one's going to be about 14 millimeters, which I don't feel bad about. That'll look all right. To compensate, I'll add a couple of extra millimeters in length as well. This is currently about 109 millimeters. We'll do maybe 113, 114. This is a dyed wood. Not certain of the species. Possibly maple. Going to make a clamping call by tracing around the top surface here, which hasn't been deformed as much. I can cut that out and use that to clamp this section of the body that's misaligned. Looking at this bridge again, I think it might actually be made of poplar. Regardless, I'm going to be using pear wood to replicate it. And pear is just a beautiful wood. It carves so nicely. It's got this kind of mellow texture to it. It's hard, like soft maple might be. You know, it's harder than poplar, but it's one of my favorites. So I'm going to use this. This is a quarter sawn piece, so the grain is cut. It moves through vertically. It's very stable. I set the bridge blank up in my saddle slotting jig to cut a dado that would basically mimic the channel in the previous bridge. To cut the narrow saddle slot, I'll use a tiny 1/16 of an inch bit in 2 passes. I maintain parallel by taping a piece of straight stock to the platform and using veneer as a shim to move the fence over a very tiny amount. So I can pull out the veneer and the shim and then run a second pass. To deal with the loose back, I first have to clean out the joint, use a palette knife, then a thin piece of metal with sandpaper adhered to it. Using the shaped caul, I can pull things back into alignment. Okay, so the sides came in very nicely flush. The binding on this side is tipped a little bit from when it was re-glued previously. So I might have to separate that again, clean out the channel a little bit, and then re-glue it so that it'll fit more flush. But other than that, yeah, can't complain. And forcing the box back into something resembling a rectangle has helped us out in terms of the neck angle. Now it's sitting just around 4 millimeters off the top surface of the soundboard, which is around 5/32. That's good. That means that we won't have to sand as much off the heel. Up comes the fingerboard extension. I think the necks on these were shaped prior to the addition of the fingerboard. There's a little discrepancy around the heel. The necks are just a little bit too wide there, but there's also lots of evidence of the shaping process. You know, there's bruising from the file or rasp work. In this case, I'm removing the 12th fret, which is kind of confusing, because usually it's the next one up. But I know the dovetails in these tend to be quite narrow in comparison to like a Martin, so if I use the 12th fret and then drill in at an angle, I'll be much closer to the dovetail pocket. I've been heating things up with the foam cutters for about 10 minutes. Feels like it's starting to get a bit loose. That came out with no problems. Pretty dirty glue at use in this case. The fingerboard extension is so tenuous. It feels like it's halfway broken, which it is. And it's not surprising because the board is so thin. They're only a couple of millimeters under the fret slots, and it was forced so far forward. So I need to reinforce that. It can't stay that way. I'll pull out the 10th fret in this case, saw through the slot, then I'll heat up the board and remove it. Yeah, it's really cracked. So I'll get some glue in there, and I'll clamp it to this nice flat phenolic board. I found a router template in my collection that was about the right size. I taped and glued that in place. I routed out a mortise. The fingerboard, it turns out, is made from roasted maple. The smell is very distinctive. They just baked maple wood until it kind of caramelized and turned brown. The color is nice, but the wood ends up quite brittle. It has the structural cohesion of something like a ginger snap cookie. You know, it turns to powder rather than shavings. Probably not my first choice for a fingerboard wood. I took out 1.5 millimeters, which brought me to the underside of the fret slots. Then I made the inlay piece that would fit in the slot. Need to round over the corners so they'll match the radius left over from the router bit. I planed the inlay flush, sanded it, worked pretty well, and then I glued the extension back in place. Got to clean out the old glue from the mortise and also from around the dovetail. They did a good job of using some diving grain and hiding it under the fingerboard. But you can see there's a couple of little splits going on there. There's just the one transverse brace before we get to the block. And the block itself is fairly short and skinny. So I'm thinking I might put a pad under there as well. That'll help to shore up this area a bit and act as a cleat. Just want to take a second and comment just how deeply undercut the cheeks of the heel are. It's really only contacting the sides of the body along a very thin knife edge along each side, which isn't the best for stability. I think you want something of a flat landing because on a soft wood like this neck, which I am assuming is poplar, is going to crush a little bit under tension over time. It can deform slightly, so having more solid contact would be better in the long run. Did the usual sandpaper pulling to correct the neck angle. And again, I want the projected angle of the neck to wind up just above the front edge of the bridge. Here's the fingerboard brace and its approximate location. To achieve a tight fit, I have to graft on some material on the sides of the dovetail. And I'll glue the neck back on. Here's more evidence of the neck carve being finished before the fingerboard was put on. A little bit of an overlap on both sides there too. The wooden nut, which was also made from roasted maple, decided to disintegrate when I tapped it. Needed a fairly thick fingerboard wedge on this one because the neck angle changed so much. Here I'm marking out the grooves, the string separation grooves on the back edge of the bridge. I'll saw those. This is very much like making a nut. In fact, I'll use my nut files to increase their depth. Here I'm using some brown aniline dye to change the color of the bridge from the pinkish hue of the pear to a more satisfying and expected brown tone. Anytime you fool around with the fingerboard extension by cutting it off or putting a big wedge under it, there's likely to be some kind of fret leveling necessary in the area around the joint. These old frets are so narrow that recrowning them is pretty difficult and maybe not necessary. Like, they didn't do crowning at the factory. They just left them square and probably ran some sandpaper over them to kind of bump off the edges. But I did my best. Yes, I polished them. Singular. And of course I put in some fret dot markers. Why wouldn't I? I think this design of tailpiece basically needs to be understrung. I've got way more saddle height than they had previously, and there's just, if you string it from the top, it's just, there's not enough break angle there. Oh, what a pleasant sound. Of course, because I'm switching this to lefty, the string grooves aren't big enough for the bass strings, so there's some filing to do. Well, now that it's strung up, halfway through the setup process, I'm convinced that this tailpiece and floating bridge is just useless, for a number of reasons. The tailpiece is not stiff enough to pull the strings down into the guiding grooves in the back of the bridge, so spacing just goes out the window. And this saddle being much taller than the previous one, it's still not really functional. I could make it work by filing grooves into it, but that's really cheesy. The other thing is, with the tall saddle and the string tension, the top is sinking a bit in the area of the bridge because of the downward pressure on it. And in fact, the action is now too low on the treble side. This is tuned down. It's got 11 to 52s on it, and it's in D standard. The action on the high E is like 3/64ths of an inch. So to compensate, I'd have to make a taller saddle, which is going to increase that downward pressure, cause more sinkage, and likely end up in exactly the same place, right? The cycle will continue until something breaks. So I'm going to tell the owner that we're getting rid of this stuff. It's just not good. I probably should have listened to my spidey senses before wasting my time, because I think I've come to this conclusion in the past. I'm going to make a standard pin bridge. There'll need to be another wide brace underneath there, about 1 inch or 25 millimeters wide, fairly low, but capped with maple in the area of the pins to act as a bridge pad. And yeah, maybe I'll film it, maybe not, we'll see. I get a surprising number of people inquiring about these guitars, and the question is always, are they any good? Should I buy one? And the answer is always, sure, if you want to put a bunch of money into getting it working. Because as we see here, usually there's a lot of things that need doing before they'll be enjoyable to play. Like the neck reset is only the beginning on these. Needs a new nut. To be honest, I'd really want new frets in it. I hate these frets. But at that point, might as well just make a whole new fretboard, because intonation on these is always a bit optimistic, and I'd kind of like to see the board probably a millimeter thicker than it is, just to be more stable. This is an operation I'm going to do, by the way, on one of these in a month or two. It's very similar to this guitar. Often there are loose braces in there, so as an investment, unless someone gives it to you for free for being such a very good boy, you're not going to make any money on these things, ever. You'll be at a loss. It might keep up with inflation. So, that being said, they look good, right? They're pretty charming. They're kind of nice to have hanging around because they look like an old guitar. And maybe you can't spend $7,000 on a Martin 018, but you want to surround yourself with a vision of antiquity. Maybe it's for you, but it'll be an expensive project if you can't do the work yourself. So be aware.